I'm Peter Block here in New Orleans at the HA annual meeting, and with me are two good friends, Kim Eagle on the left, Deepak Bhatt in the middle, and Deepak and Kim and I are talking about the meeting. What is sort of the hot stuff to come out of here? And there are three trials that are perhaps not so hot, but maybe lukey-warmies, but not so bad. The GLAGOV trial, the ART trial, and the third is Future, and we'll talk about those a little bit. I'm going to start with Kim, GLAGOV.
So GLAGOV is like an hors d'oeuvre.
That's good.
Before a potentially fine meal. So GLAGOV is a study that was reported here, taking patients, high-risk patients with coronary disease and doing a coronary ultrasound to see whether the PCSK9 inhibitor evolipumab on top of statin would affect coronary plaque volume. And as you might expect, there was a substantial reduction in coronary plaque volume in the patients who got the PCSK9 inhibitor. This was not a trial that was precision in terms of the endpoints, MI, cardiovascular death, stroke. But the endpoints that they did measure, the signal was in the right direction for benefit. But I say it's an hors d'oeuvre because the four-year trial will probably be reported in the spring, 27,000 patients. And then we'll really have what we want, which is the endpoints.
You know, I'm not so sure that this is all that terrific, to be very honest with you. Remember when we did the first IVUS trials, when is it, 10 years ago now? And there was a reduction in plaque volume and so forth. It was only about 1 to 2%. And I said to myself, really? Well, Steve Nissen told me today that made a big difference in terms of the way the plaque behaved, which I guess is probably biologically true, but I'm not certain of that. But the fact of the matter is, in this trial, there's only a 1% reduction. Now it comes out the p-value because they're using their own cells as their controls, right? The p-value is easier to achieve. Would you agree with that?
I don't know. I mean, I actually thought it counted as a hot trial because it showed something that had been shown for statins, that had even been shown for ezetimibe, and then ultimately with those compounds, there were clinical trials that showed event reduction. I agree with Kim. I mean, this is an appetizer. We still do need to see what the clinical trial shows in terms of cardiovascular outcomes, but it certainly points in the right direction. And if history serves as any example with respect to statins and ezetimibe ultimately showing clinical benefit, I'm hopeful the same will happen here, but we'll see. I mean,
there is some really good news in this trial, though, and that is that people who had LDLs in the 20 to 35 range, their brains didn't fall off, right? And their spinal cords still worked.
Absolutely. There's no evidence of neurologic effects of these agents so far.
Yeah, and I think that is very reassuring because we really didn't know whether or not LDLs in the 35 range, which was the average in this trial, would in fact affect cognition, for example, and it doesn't seem to. That's good news.
Yeah, even the very low LDL levels, at least for the duration of time of these studies, seems to be safe.
Yeah, we'll see. We need a big trial. ART. Anyone want to take ART?
ART's a very interesting study. It's a randomized trial of patients having bypass surgery to either single left internal mammary artery or bilateral internal mammary arteries, and 5-year outcomes. And the trial showed, as you might expect, a higher incidence of sternal wound infection in the patients who had bilateral internal artery harvesting. And at 5 years, the endpoints were very similar. I think that what's important about this trial is that it's not long enough in follow-up to really tell us whether this dual arterial strategy will have an effect on what we really care about, which is future MI, heart failure, et cetera. So I wouldn't misinterpret the negativity of this trial to say that more arterial harvesting is not superior to using more vein grafts, for
And it's
example.
going to go out 10 years, so they have another 5 years to go. Isn't that right, Kim?
That is, and you might argue it needs to go even longer. You know, if you look at vein graft attrition at 7, 8, 9 years, it could still be null at 10 years and be positive at 20 years.
I will tell you, though, in the United States, surgeons still like saphenous vein grafts, and it will be reassuring. It will be reassuring. Exactly. Yeah.
And you know, there were more mediastinal infections here, so a significant excess. So some harm, no evident benefit. But I agree with Kim. We've got to see what the 10-year results show. But I think a number of surgeons will use this as justification to say, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, which is okay for now.
And the left internal mammary, of course, is a must.
Yeah.
Every patient should have
If you have
that.
a Lima lad, you live forever, and so that's good news.
Yes.
most of the time.
Maybe we should all have one
Sometimes.
prophylactically. Sometimes. Okay, so now we have to go to future. There we go. Let's go to the future. Go ahead, Sears.
All right,
Deepak.
great. How come you gave me future and gave him the 2 other trials?
Because he knows more.
Okay. Well, future, I'm not sure we need to spend much time on it. It was a trial of patients and seeing if an FFR-guided strategy would reduce cardiovascular outcomes. The trial was stopped prematurely by the Data Safety Monitoring Board because they thought there was excess mortality in the FFR-guided strategy. By the end of the trial, there was no mortality difference. So honestly, I think it's a non-informative trial. I think for the audience, that there are only 2 important messages. If you hear some buzz about FFR killing people because of this trial, ignore it. It's kind of silly to think FFR is killing people. And it just shows you that trial structures matter. I mean, with this DSMB, it's really a case of what were you thinking? I mean, why would you stop this trial when there's just a small number of events? It's implausible that FFR is killing people, and then turn what could have been an informative trial into one that really doesn't tell us much.
And we have a lot of information about FFR. That's good stuff, and it really does help strategy.
Yeah,
Cam,
that
your
was a
thoughts?
huge concern of mine, that when this gets out there on a newspaper, that somebody's going to say FFR doesn't work anymore, and that's simply not true.
Yeah, it goes against the guidelines. It goes against other randomized clinical trials. So, I mean, it does show that doing clinical trials is not just a matter of throwing people together and just making it happen. I mean, it really does require expertise.
Yeah, this whole business of clinical trials, which is what all these discussions are about, is more complicated and sometimes really difficult to pull off and be successful with. So,
And the Data Safety Monitoring Board, an underappreciated role. Those guys don't get any respect, but it's a lot of work, a lot of thought necessary.
and if you do it wrong, you can mess it up.
Yeah, and a very vocal member of a committee like that can have a big effect, and it might be negative. It might really hurt a trial like this.
Okay, enough
Absolutely.
editorializing.
Sounds
Thanks
like
a
the
lot.
party is starting behind us.
Yeah, it does indeed. So we better
Mardi
quit.
Gras.
That's right.
Thanks for being here, folks.